Good morning. I hear mainstream preachers talking all the time about God. They say you need to know God. You need to have God in your heart. You need to have God in your lives. But then they confuse those that listen by implying God is irrelevant somehow, or His words don't matter anymore. Why do they do this? By saying things like God's laws are done away and God of the Old Testament is done, and all you have to do is believe, it tends to make people walk away scratching their head and wondering, especially after they've done a serious examination of the Scriptures and they look at them. Because if you say God is dead, or God of the Old Testament is dead, why does it say in Deuteronomy chapter 32:40, "Indeed I lift up my hand to heaven, and as I live forever"? He says, I live forever. Does God lie? And why does it say in Matthew, if the law is done away with, if Christ came down and He says in Matthew chapter 5 verse 17, in His own words, He says, do not think, Matthew chapter 5 verse 17, do not think that I come to destroy the law of the prophets. I did not come to destroy, but to fulfill. For assuredly I say to you, till heaven and earth pass away, not one jot or one tittle will by no means pass from the law till all is fulfilled. Whoever therefore breaks one of the least of these commandments and teaches men to so shall be called least in the kingdom of heaven. But whoever does and teaches them, he shall be called great in the kingdom of heaven. For I say to you, unless your righteousness exceeds the righteousness of the scribes and Pharisees, you will by no means enter into the kingdom of heaven. So, what does this mean? Why do people say that the law is done away with, the God of the Old Testament is done, and these things like this all the time in order for you to get to know God? If all you have to do to believe, then why do they tell you that you should not sin? If all you have to do is believe to get into the kingdom of heaven, then sin shouldn't matter. But they tell you that you can't sin, and they tell you if you do sin, you're going to go to hell. And in 1 John chapter 3 verse 4, he says, whoever commits sin also commits lawlessness, and sin is lawlessness. So sin is the breaking of God's commandments, the breaking of the law. So how can God's law be done away if sin still exists in these churches? See what I mean? You come up with more questions than answers a lot of times whenever you hear these people speak. Other religious questions that seem to never have a really good answer are, where do we find the birthday of Jesus Christ in the Bible? I've looked and searched all over. Where do you find the phrase immortal soul? You don't find that. Where do you find Christmas in the Bible? Where do you find December 25th in the Bible? I've looked and I can't find those either. Where is the proof that Christ rose on Sunday? All it says is Mary went to the tomb on Sunday morning and the tomb was empty. That's all it says. It doesn't say He was resurrected on Sunday. You see, it's perplexing in the average person when they look at these with a very objective view. They come away confused. And all you get is baffling answers to serious questions. And it causes people to turn away from organized religion. These men don't know God. These men don't know God. They struggle desperately trying to explain who God is. And that becomes confusing when they do try to explain who God is. They say God is 3 in 1 and 1 in 3, and Christ says in John chapter 10 verse 30, and this is the reason why, He says, my Father who has given them, He's talking about the disciples to me, is greater than all, and no one is able to snatch them out of my Father's hand. I and my Father are one. And because He says I and my Father are one, that Christ is somehow 3 in 1 persons. Well, how does that work? Are they 3 in 1, or are they separate beings? If they are one, who did Christ pray to? Who gave the Spirit to Christ, the Holy Spirit to Christ when John baptized him? Who gave the disciples to Christ, as it says here in John chapter 10, verse 30? You know, who resurrected Christ when he was totally dead and buried in a tomb? Who did the resurrection? You know, things that are said in other languages like Aramaic and Greek, they sometimes have different meanings than what they're translated in the Bible. If we read that phrase, we may think that they are one person when he says, I and the Father are one. But spoken in Aramaic or Greek or Hebrew or however you want to put it, the phrase may mean they are the same purpose, the same thought, the same mind. Separate beings but have one goal. And I tend to think that's what it means, because there's other reasons why people push the agenda of the Trinity. So who do we see in the Bible as God? We see the Father and we see the Son. Duality. And part of the confusion is just a very bad explanation from preachers today as to the identity of who Christ truly is. Christ was a member of the family of God from the very beginning of time and creation. And the word God in Genesis chapter 1 verse 1 the word is Elohim. And many times throughout the Old Testament, I may add. And it has a plural meaning. It means more than one. Christ said, no one has seen the Father at any time. Was Christ lying? Did he not know what he was saying? In John chapter 6, verse 45, it is written in the prophets, and they shall all be taught by God. Therefore, everyone who has heard and learned from the Father comes to me. Not that anyone has seen the Father, except he who is from God. He has seen the Father. Most assuredly I say to you, he who believes in me has everlasting life. And who is he talking about? The one who came from God. He's talking about himself, Christ. He came from God. He has seen the Father, but no one else. So doesn't this make you wonder who the God was that was leading Israel out of Egypt on the Exodus into the Sinai desert for those 40 years by fire by night and a cloud of smoke by day? Doesn't that make you wonder who that God was if it wasn't God? Who was the God that spoke to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob? Who was he that told Noah to build the boat and covered the world with water, killed all humanity? Well, it tells us in 1 Corinthians chapter 10, verse 1. He says, Moreover, brethren, I do not want you to be unaware that all of our fathers were under the cloud, all passed through the sea, all were baptized into Moses in the cloud and in the sea. All ate that same spiritual food, and all drank that same spiritual drink, for they drank that spiritual rock that followed them. Now get this. Look at this very verse, this very next words. And that rock was Christ. But with most of them God was not well pleased, for their bodies were scattered in the wilderness. It says that Christ brought them out of Israel. Jesus the Christ himself, Jesus the Messiah, brought them out of Egypt into the Sinai desert. And it also tells us in John chapter 1 verse 1, in the beginning was a Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. And he was in the beginning with God, and all things were made through him, and without him nothing was made that was made. In him was life, and life was the light of men, and the light shines in the darkness, and the darkness did not comprehend it. There was a man sent from God, whose name was John, and this man came for a witness to bear witness of the light, that all through him might believe. He was not that light, but was sent to bear witness of that light, and was the true light, which gives light to every man coming to the world. He was in the world, and the world was made through him, and the world did not know him. He came to his own, and his own did not receive him. But as many received him, to them he gave the right to become children of God, to those who believe in his name, who were born not of blood, nor the will of flesh, nor the will of man, but of God. And the Word became flesh and dwelt among us, and he beheld the glory of the only begotten of the Father, full of grace and truth. John bore witness of him and cried out, saying, This was he of whom I said, he who comes after me is preferred before me, for he was before me. So according to the word of John, according to John, who spent many days and many months traveling throughout Judea with Christ, Jesus was the creator of this world. He was the one who breathed the air into Adam and Eve, and who spoke to Noah, told Noah to build the boat. And he was that being we see so oftentimes in the Old Testament, dealing in so many different ways with the prophets and with humankind. In Colossians chapter 1, it reinforces this. Colossians chapter 1, starting verse 15, he says, He is the image of the invisible God, the firstborn over all creation. For by him all things were created that are in heaven and that are on earth, visible and invisible, whether thrones, dominions, or principalities, or powers. All things were created through him and for him. And he is before all things, and in him all things consist. He is the head of the body of the church, who is the beginning of the firstborn of the dead, that in all things he may have preeminence. So, this is Paul speaking. So we have a statement made by Paul, we have a statement made by John, that he is the creator. We actually had two statements made by Paul, because he made the one in 1 Corinthians as well. All things were created by Christ. Wow, what a revelation. Have we ever heard this before from mainstream preachers out there? Do they teach this? Why not? Or does it go against their agenda? Did you know this? He was the God of the Old Testament. He became flesh as a human being, the eternal God, who gave us the Ten Commandments, who gave us the law, the Torah, who gave us Deuteronomy, who gave us the sacrifices, because they were before him. They were a prophecy of his sacrifice to mankind. And he became the flesh. He became God again, sitting at the right hand of the Father after his sacrifice. In Hebrews chapter 1, verse 3. And he is the radiance of his glory and the exact representation of his nature, and upholds all things by the word of his power. And when he had made purification of sin, he sat down at the right hand of the Majesty on high. He sat at the right hand of the Father. He's sitting there today. That's his place. He's earned it. He became the first fruits of those who will be resurrected. The first fruits of the church. He's the very first, as it says in 1 Corinthians 15:20. He is the first of those that will be resurrected. So we have more questions than answers. We don't hear this in Sunday morning sermons. But perhaps this will make you think a little bit. Make you think about what those preachers are telling you. Is it all about love? After all, he was God of the Old Testament. And when the plagues and things hit Egypt, and whenever the world was destroyed at the time of Noah, that was Christ. That was the one that everybody says did away with all those things. Came to correct all those things. It also says at the end time he will come and his robe will be covered in blood. This doesn't sound like the Jesus that people preach. He has a mission and he has an agenda and he has a plan for man. Do you know what that plan is? Have you ever heard what that plan is? Well, I invite you to investigate that a little bit. I invite you to ask questions. I invite you to come onto our website. Listen to our sermons on YouTube and in our archives. And perhaps you'll learn something new. Join our online streaming services and our Bible study on Wednesday night at 7 p.m. And you can find the times and dates at houseofgod.tv. All one word, houseofgod.tv. Just go there. Look, investigate, check us out, see who we are. We'll see you next time. God bless.